Welcome to Module 11. So in Module number 10, we talked about resumes and looking for jobs and how to navigate some of the job ads you might find in certain biology careers. And so part of your homework was to actually find a job ad and to write a resume and a cover letter. And we're going to do kind of a second part of that module. So in Module 11, we're going to talk about the interview process. And so this is really important for everyone, really. And even if you're a pre-health professional, in fact, it's really important because a lot of your med school and dental school application process, you're going to have to go through a significant interview process. And so I'm going to give you some general tips on the interview process. So some things you have to think about when doing interviews, and then your homework will be kind of like a practice mock interview where you'll answer some typical interview questions. And what I want to give a caveat to, not caveat, but just an emphasis for is there's lots of advice about how to do well in an interview, but in reality, everyone can do well in an interview, and practice is the best thing that you can do for interviews. So we'll talk about practice a lot as well. All right, so my biology career, the interview process, this is going to be a relatively short module because it is kind of just an extension of module number 10. In the face-to-face class, we kind of have you guys pair up and interview each other and do some other activities like that. But because we're online, we can't do some of those things, so this will be relatively short. So doing well in an interview, there's actually a lot of things that you have to do if you do get that great call about you're asked to come down for an interview. It's exciting news. It's really good news. It means typically you're probably in the top 5 of the candidates, maybe top 3 for a certain job. If you're in a health professional, if you're going to go to med school or dental school or PA school, something like that, getting an interview really means that you're in the running to get accepted to that school. But the interview is kind of the closing part of it. You got to do really well in this interview. So the tips I'm going to give you are kind of broken down into 3 different sections. There's things that you need to do well in an interview before the actual interview, and in fact, most of your work is before the interview. Then there's things that you can do during the interview or you have to kind of keep in mind when you are doing the interview. And then after the interview, there's actually a couple things that you can do as well. All right. And the goal of all interviews for a company or for a school is to find out who you are, is to get to know you better and to make sure that you're going to be a really good fit for the company. But the goal for you as an interviewee is to also see if it's a good fit. Get to know the people who are going to be might be working with. And the best piece of advice for all of this is to always be yourself. People are going to hire a person. They're not just hiring a skill. And so it's important to show that, that you're personable and things like that. All right, so before the interview, here's some things you can do. One is you can go shopping. So for many interviews, you have to dress professionally. So I'm going to talk about professional interviews. These are maybe interviews that you're going to get after you graduate college or health professional school interviews, those type of things. You're going to need a business suit typically. Very formal wear is typically the standard attire for the interview. Obviously, if you're doing like a summer job or an internship and it's kind of you're doing work experience while you're still in college, you may not need to show up for a business suit, like if you're going to go waitress and just get hired by a restaurant. But you always want to dress nice. In fact, the first impressions are the most important. And so having a sloppy dress is essentially a bad look. And so make sure that you're dressing appropriate for the style of interview that you're going for. Most professional interviews are going to require professional attire. The other important thing about first impressions for interviews is timeliness. So obviously getting a job is going to be important to be on time all the time for that job, and the first step you show that is by going to your interview and being there early. There's nothing worse than someone showing up late for an interview. Now, granted, there are emergencies and there are things that can happen, but you really want to try and plan accordingly to get there early. Another important aspect is that if you're applying for a job that's in a different location, so it's not local, maybe you're going to a different school and you're going to go for an interview there, you really have to know where you're going to be. Where do you need to go? Where are you staying? Do you know anyone who's going to meet you? And it's important to get at least one contact information, maybe a phone number of someone who's in charge of your interview, so that way if there are any emergencies, you can contact someone. So definitely do your research, and if the person asking, hey, come for an interview, didn't give you all the information that you think you need, feel free to email them or call them to ask for more information. For example, where will you meet? What time should you show up? If you're traveling somewhere, what do you recommend for travel? Is the subway good? Those type of things are going to be important, and don't feel that like you can't ask those questions. Making sure that you're there on time is extremely important. The biggest challenge or the most work you're going to have to do before any interview is the research that you're going to need to do. So as I mentioned in the job ad, when you write your cover letter, you kind of want to know what the job you're applying for is and what the company is or the school you're going to is. But if you got an interview, you really want to know everything about the company. And most companies, most schools, most organizations have something called a mission statement, and it kind of states what the purpose of that organization is. You want to study everything you can find about that organization for two reasons. One, you want to be well knowledgeable about the company you're applying to, but two, you want to make sure that this is something that you're going to want to work for, that this is a good fit for you as well. And the only way you can do that is studying the organization or the school that you might be applying to as a professional school. I'll give you one example. My wife was applying for a job at Promega, and Promega is a biotech company up in Wisconsin. And big biotech companies essentially sell reagents and different chemicals for researchers. And one of the interview questions she got was, what is one product or product line that you think we should be making or doing that we're not actively doing? And that question was testing her on two levels. One level was asking her, what are your ideas? Do you have any kind of cool ideas that we haven't thought about that might mean that you're a good fit for this company? The other real reason they asked the question is they wanted to see how much she knew about that company, because they're really well known for things like molecular biology reagents. And if she said something like, oh, I think you should sell some molecular biology reagents, it's very clear she didn't know that company very well. And so it's kind of a test type question. So always make sure you know as much as you can about that organization. And usually nowadays with the internet, there's lots of information about everything online that you can look up. This isn't necessarily always required, but I would always recommend you do this. Bring a couple copies of your resume, some references, maybe a list of references. Kind of bring your application you sent with you and bring some copies. And the reason for that is you're going to meet a bunch of people during the interview process, and you may run into someone who hasn't even seen your resume ever. And they may say, oh, do you have a resume you can give me? And you definitely want to have that available. So always come. You may not use it. You may go home with the same amount of copies you brought. That's no big deal, but you always do want to be prepared. One tip you'll find before you can do the interview is when you practice having what's called an elevator pitch. And many of you maybe have not heard about an elevator pitch, but what this means, this is about a 30-second to 1 minute explanation of who you are and why you're applying for the job, or maybe why you're the best fit for the job. And the reason it's called an elevator pitch is, let's say you're moving from, usually during an interview, you move from one interview to the next. You kind of meet multiple people throughout a company. And as you're walking along the hallway and go into the elevator, maybe you run into, I don't know, the president of the company or the CEO or someone who you're not supposed to interview with, but you're going to work with and you're going to meet. And you shake hands and you introduce yourself and they say, hey, tell me about yourself. So you essentially have a short elevator ride to tell them about yourself. That's called an elevator pitch. And those are tricky, and you want to practice that a little bit, but be prepared to give about a 30-second to minute-long kind of, my name is so-and-so, and I'm applying for this job, and I'm really qualified, I got my degree here, and, just a really quick rundown of your cover letter, essentially. Lastly, like I said in the introduction, is practice, practice, practice. Do not make your real interview your first ever interview. Have friends help you practice, record yourself while you practice the questions, because what you think you're going to say in your head is not always what you're going to say when you're nervous. And so it's very important to practice those. If you're a health professional major here, so you're pre-med, PA, whatever, remember that we do have the pre-health advising committee, and we do full-scale 1-hour-long mock interviews where we have you practice over and over again, and we ask you really hard questions, have you even dress up formally, and we try and give you a really real scenario so that you can practice, and then we can give you feedback. If you're not a health professional and you do want to practice with someone, definitely find some friends, contact some mentors that you have or some faculty members that you're comfortable asking, and say, I really need to practice, can you help me out? And usually online there's all sorts of interview questions, and in fact part of your homework will be to answer a couple or a few interview questions. That's the practice that you want to do. So you don't have to necessarily have a full-scale mock interview, but you definitely want to practice actually reciting out your answers to see how they sound, because practice makes the best interview. So you've done all your work before the interview, you've researched the company, you've practiced, you've got all your attire for it, you know where you're going to go when you're traveling, and now comes the interview. And this can be nerve-wracking for some people who maybe aren't used to interviews. And the bottom line is it's okay to be nervous, so don't be afraid of being nervous. But really make sure that you remind yourself to be yourself, all right? They're interviewing you because they like you already, and they wanna hire you. And basically what they're looking for is maybe give me a reason why I shouldn't hire you. So your interview is just a time for you to be yourself and relax. And so I always encourage you to kind of just try to relax the best you can and really enjoy the process. Some tips for during the interview. You must practice common courtesy, and what I mean by that is anyone you meet, you need to shake your hands and introduce yourself and be respectful to them, of course. But the key here is don't assume everyone knows who you are, all right? So always shake your hands, introduce yourself, and even possibly say, depending on what you're doing, say I'm interviewing for this position or whatever, or you're from Pensacola, and that's just common courtesy because you never know. Someone might say, oh, I have a relative in Pensacola, and you can kind of chit-chat about Pensacola a little bit, and that will help relax you as well. Usually, most interviews are very friendly. People just want to kind of get to know you. So always make sure that you're practicing common courtesy and that you're at your best behavior. This is important too. Always maintain very good posture. Don't slouch. Use good hand movements during the interview. And it really depends on the interview setting. Sometimes you'll be interviewed in a simple chair at a desk. Maybe you'll be at a conference table. Sometimes you'll be interviewed on a couch, something very comfortable like that. You want to make sure that you're not, you're always maintaining an accurate posture and that you're not kind of succumbing to the environment that you're at. So if you're on a couch, don't sit back and relax on the couch and put your arms up and things like that. You really want to still maintain a professional demeanor when you're doing the interview. During the interview, some of the questions, and in fact I'll show you some of the questions that you'll get during the interview, but some of the questions are going to ask you some negative things. They're going to try and focus on something negative about you. And it's really important during interviews to always stay positive. The interviewers are going to try to poke holes in something. Maybe they might criticize your grades, or maybe they'll criticize your experience. And you always want to find a rebuttal for that. Find something about, okay, sure, I don't have the experience, but look at this activity, or see how I've done here, and that's indicative of myself, or things like that. One thing I always make sure students know is don't apologize for any lack of experience that you may have. You may think, oh my gosh, I'm not qualified for this job. Why are they interviewing me? It's okay to think that way, all right, but you don't want that to be known to the interviewers. You want to be very confident, and so never apologize for any lack of experience. Just have an explanation or some other rebuttal for it, okay? So always stay positive, and I'll show you an example of that when we get to your homework assignment. On that same line, you want to make sure that you're always answering questions honestly. You never know what they know about. They might have already called one of your references or called a reference about you, and they're going to ask you something about that they already know the answer to, and they're just going to test whether you're answering questions honestly. So always be yourself and never lie during an interview, because you may get caught, and then the interview is going to be essentially over at that point. So be yourself, that's important. Interview questions typically should be about 30 seconds to a minute long, a typical answer. It really depends on the question. Of course, you can have some questions that are much longer, like, hey, tell me about yourself. But the important thing is you want to be concise. You don't want to go too much into detail, so you don't need to tell them your life story. For example, if they ask you, tell me about yourself, you don't have to start from when you were born. If that's relevant to the job, maybe, but you can just start for when you're in college. Well, I'm a marine biology major. I'm going to get my degree in marine biology. I did these activities. I was part of these student organizations, or so on. Very quickly, kind of, you can give an answer and then just hold the details, because the interviewer can always ask a follow-up question. It's really important to basically directly address the question being asked and try to be as concise as you can. And a lot of times when you get nervous, when all of us get nervous, we have the tendency to ramble on. and just keep talking because we're nervous, and we'll talk faster and faster sometimes and things like that. So be aware of that, and practice is your best bet. You'll find out how to do that when you practice interview questions over and over again. So ultimately, be concise. This last one's actually quite difficult depending on who you are. Some people are very good at this and some people are not so good at it. But you want to always maintain eye contact when you're during the interview. The interviewer is going to ask you a question. They're going to look at your kind of body language. And if you're always looking up at the sky or looking down at the table, it's a very detached interview. It can feel very foreign. Maintaining eye contact is important because it means that you're interested, you're engaged with the interviewer, and things like that. This can be difficult for some people. Some people don't like direct eye contact, especially if you're more introverted possibly. You want to make sure that you practice this. This is easily practiced because you can get a friend and just say, hey, look at my eyes. Or you can use a camera and just videotape yourself and make sure that you're staring into the camera a lot to make that eye contact. If you're being interviewed by more than one person may ask a question, but you want to make sure that you're making eye contact with everyone in that room because at some point, some people might feel like they're being alienated if you're not making eye contact with them. So you did your work before the interview. You went to the interview and you had a fun, and it was a great interview, it was a great process. There is something extra you can do after the interview. Hopefully they were impressed and they want to hire you, but one thing I recommend you always do after an interview is common courtesy. You send typically a thank you email, or even if you like to send handwritten notes, that's perfectly acceptable for this type of thing. You want to find the contact information for each person that you interviewed with. You have to remember they're taking time out of their day. They're spending time interviewing you, and you want to thank them for that. And so you can send them a thank you email or a thank you letter. And this isn't just common courtesy about thank yous. There's actually some strategy behind doing this, because not only are you thanking them for your time, but you can include in that email or in that letter, you can reiterate essentially why that you're still interested in the job. So you can say, I'm highly interested. I was really impressed with your company, and I can't wait to join the team. And you can also include why still you think you're the best candidate. So again, you're kind of summarizing your cover letter in a sentence and your thank you note. Now don't be overt about this. Don't include a paragraph of things about why you're good, but definitely just reiterate kind of your strengths. And this does a couple of things. One, it's very, interviewers like this a lot. It actually shows very good common courtesy. But essentially you're closing your entire package. You started this whole application process by submitting a resume and a cover letter. And in that cover letter, you're trying to explain to the company why you're the best candidate for the job or why they should hire you. In the interview, you're trying to explain in person why you're the best candidate for the job and why they should hire you. And now in this thank you letter, you're just one more time explaining why you're interested in the job, why you're the best candidate for the company, and why they should hire you. So it's kind of this overall package, and it really leaves everything on a really good note. And I can tell you from personal experience that this is actually valued. Many interviewers do acknowledge if they get a thank you, oh, that's really nice of them, and it can help. Now, it's not going to be the only thing that's going to get you a job. I mean, but if it's a really tight race between you and some other candidate, and you both are really good, and they want to hire both of you, but they can only pick one, something like this can actually really help a little bit. All right, so I want to. Those are some basic tips. I know that I kind of went really fast, and this is a really short module. I want to show you a 5-minute YouTube video. Essentially, this is from Harvard University, and just give some extra advice on interview skills. And in reality, if you Google interview skills or tips, or even go to YouTube, you're going to find a plethora of information on how to practice for interviews. So I want to kind of just scratch the surface, give you some exposure to what you might expect in an interview. But when your interview does come in real life, you actually have an interview coming up, make sure you do your research and your practice, because it is really important. All right, so let's watch this video, and then I'll tell you about your homework assignment.
In order to prepare for an interview, it's important to research in 3 areas. First area that you want to research is you. You want to research yourself, basically a summary of your qualifications, your relevant qualifications. You want to ask yourself how you can meet the employer's needs, what you bring to the table, and how you can add value. Then you also want to make sure that you research the position. You want to have a clear understanding of what an XYZ does. Okay, again, meeting the needs of the position. You also want to research the employer. So they might say, why do you want to work for us? What do you know about us? So who's the CEO, history, products, services, competitors, etc. And then finally, I would say that you want to research the industry as well. So you, the position, the organization, and the industry. You want to make sure that you've prepared a series of short, relevant stories, okay, about yourself. It's something called the show and tell method. So you don't just want to say, like, these are my skills. You want to be able to demonstrate, to have short, relevant stories that have a beginning, a middle, and an end. I would recommend that you practice. At the very least, lock yourself in a room with a mirror and practice responses to commonly asked questions. You don't want to script it. You're not an actress. You want it to be conversational, but you want to hear yourself say these responses out loud. And if possible, I would recommend that you set up a mock interview with a professional career counselor. You want to make sure that you arrive on time. I generally say arrive 30 minutes in the vicinity, but about 10 to 15 minutes to announce yourself in the reception area. Then once you meet your interviewer, first impressions matter, and studies say it takes about 7 seconds. A prospective employer is immediately sizing you up. He or she is deciding, do they like you? Are you intelligent? Are you kind? Okay. You want to have good eye contact. You want to have a nice, strong handshake. And you basically want to be positive, confident, and upbeat. So watch your energy level. You want to be authentic and genuine, but most people need to turn up the volume slightly. There are basically 3 types of interviews. Some common interviews are now behavioral interviews. They begin with questions like, tell me about a time when. Tell me about a time when you were in a team and things went really well or things didn't go so well. You might have a technical interview. This might be perhaps you're going for a software engineering position. You might walk into the interview and they say, don't sit down, and they direct you to a whiteboard, give you a marker, and they want you to solve some algorithms. Perhaps you will have a case interview if you're interviewing with consulting firms, so you want to be well prepared for those in terms of practicing case questions. Telephone and Skype interviews are becoming more and more common, particularly for initial interviews. With a telephone interview, if you can get a landline, that's best. If not, make sure everything is charged up. You also want to make sure that you're in a quiet environment and that no one is going to disturb you. So the advantage is you don't have to worry about what you're wearing or what you look like, and you can have lots of notes, but you want to be organized. You want to make sure that you pace yourself, the tone, your articulation, that the energy comes forth within the telephone call. With a Skype interview, again, you want to test your equipment, make sure everything is working properly. You need to think about what you're wearing because you're going to be on camera. Have something colorful. Watch the whites, the blacks, the patterns, etc. Watch the lighting in terms of like fluorescent lighting with a Skype interview. And even though it might be your natural inclination to look at the screen, it's important to look at the camera. That's how you'll be making eye contact. And then finally, with a Skype interview, I would watch your background. Be very much aware of your background. So at the end of the interview, I would recommend that you establish next steps. Some employers will tell you what the next steps are, but if they don't, it's perfectly fine to ask, what are the next steps? I would also recommend that you have a closing statement at the end of the interview to let the interviewer know that you're very interested in the position and why you would be a great fit and match. Then in terms of once the interview is over, of course you want to send some type of thank you. It's probably going to be an email, but depending upon your audience, could be a short thank you note. In your thank you, you want to make sure, of course, that you thank the interviewer for their time, but also it's an opportunity to reiterate your interest and your qualifications. And I recommend that you send the thank you within 24 to 48 hours.
So that was a module 11. I know it was short. I'm sure you guys don't mind, but it kind of just follows along from module 10 when you were making a resume and doing a cover letter. But the interview process is important. So here's what your homework is. It's actually quite short, but this is important. Let's imagine that the job ad that you found in Module 10 is going to call you for a phone interview or even an in-person interview. All right. So let's say you get an interview for that job ad. So think about the job that you found for Module 10 homework, and that's what you're going to do this off of. I want you to go to Module 11 homework, download the Word document, and there's essentially, I believe, 6 interview questions, sample interview questions. And I want you to basically just answer them as if you were going to answer them in a real interview for that company. If you are pre-health, feel free to answer these based on that perspective. If you're going to go to a health professional school, I have no problem if you want to answer them like you were going to go on a real med school interview or something like that. And I want to walk you through these interview questions because they all have kind of a strategy or a reasoning behind why they're asked a lot in interviews. So the first question that you have to answer is, why are you interested in this position in this company? And if you're pre-health, go ahead and change this to, why are you interested in coming to our school? And this is a very basic question that you're always going to get, and it's probably usually going to be the first question. And it basically it gauges how much do you know about our company, why do you think you're a good fit? It's a very open-ended question, and so you can kind of answer this however you'd like. And so this is actually quite a difficult question sometimes because it is so broad and general. So that does take a lot of practice. The other question that you'll find a lot says, what is your greatest strength? What is your greatest weakness? This is a very common interview question. Greatest strength is kind of easy to answer. Go ahead and brag about yourself. What do you think is one of the best things about you? What is your greatest weakness? That's a tricky question because like I said, they're going to want to know what are some of your weaknesses. Are you kind of self-reflective about your weaknesses? And what are they? And how do they fit with our company? They don't want you to kind of pinpoint something really major. So for example, you don't want to say, oh, I have major anger issues and I just have outbursts all the time. That would be a really bad thing to say for a weakness. But you can say things like, I'm really passionate about my work, but I can get frustrated easily sometimes. And I'm aware of that, and so I know I have to kind of understand that when I'm in a stressful situation, that's one of my weaknesses, and I'm working on fixing that, and I have kind of stress relievers that help me with that. So you take that question, what's your weakness, and you always end that question on a positive. What is your weakness, and what is something that you're doing to fix it, or what is something that you think is a positive about this weakness? And so that's a very tricky question, but that's a very common question you get a lot. All right, this one's kind of long, but basically what this is asking is you're going to have to work with a lot of people in your life, regardless of what job you are in. So they want to know how you get along with others. And one classic question is, tell me an example of a conflict with someone and how did you deal with it? And you can bring up anything. You can bring up a sibling conflict. You can bring up a peer conflict with another student. If you are in a leadership position, you're going to have to deal with conflicts. You can use one of those as an example. And basically this just tells me about yourself. How do you handle conflict? And there's really no one right answer for this. Just you want to be honest about how you handle conflict. Many people will handle conflicts differently, and it's all okay. Obviously you don't want to go crazy and say like I handle conflict by beating someone up or something like that, but you want to give a really nice, honest answer about how you would honestly handle a conflict because it will come up. All right, what is one accomplishment you were most proud of outside of school? That's very common. Just tell me something really that you're really proud of and why. And this is telling me more about yourself. Kind of what is your self-motivation? And this can be anything. So for example, if you ran a marathon, I'm really proud of running a marathon. If you like to hike or climb or do lots of whatever you like to do as a hobby, you might have an accomplishment for that, and they want to know that. So what is your internal motivation? And that tells a lot about a candidate actually. And then the last one is kind of funny. And a little weird, but you might get questions like this, and I'll give you some other variants of this question. So basically the question is, if you could pick just one cookie to describe your personality, what type of cookie would you be and why? And the reason why you might get questions like this is, one, it's very silly, and they want to see kind of whether you're going to really take this seriously, and you do. You want to take this question very seriously. It's okay to laugh a little bit and chuckle. But this shows me about your creativity. So what is your creativity like? Can you think of something? Can you give me an explanation? We ask a lot of candidates this question sometimes. Usually like the med school candidates will ask them, and some people will pause for a very long time because they have trouble thinking of an answer. And there's truth behind that. The question is, why did it take you so long to answer this question? Do you not know yourself? Are you afraid to be yourself? Are you afraid to kind of have a silly moment for a second and refer to yourself as a cookie, those type of things. So this is just a very, it's not, you might see, it's not as common as some of these other ones, but this is a question that might pop up. Some of the variations are, if you could be a tree to describe yourself, what type of tree? If you could be a rock, if you could be, what would your friends say about you? Those type of questions are basically questions that are asking you, who are you? Tell me about yourself. But they're doing it in a very unique way, and they're going to gauge your response to this question to see how you handle kind of something different or something weird. And so sometimes interviewers want to kind of push you a little bit and see how you respond to that. And it just tells the person more about yourself. So go ahead and answer this question. I like this question because it tells me a lot about the students. Many of your answers are very creative, and it's a good question. So what I want you to do for your assignment for module number 11 is answer each one of these questions to the best of your ability. You don't have to write me pages and pages of answers. Just kind of write me a nice paragraph. And try to read it out loud and see how it sounds, because you'd be surprised how writing something is different than actually just saying it out loud if I was actually talking to you in person. And then go ahead and submit this to the Dropbox. Remember, this is our last week of modules, so Module 11 and Module 12 are the very last assignments you guys have for BioSkills because the semester is almost over. And these will be your last assignments for BioSkills. So if you have any issues with this assignment or the quiz, go ahead and take the module quiz now as well. As always, please email me. Otherwise, I will see you in module number 12, our last module.